The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.
Hello, everyone. Welcome into Students of the Game. My name is Alex Baumann, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Nathan Glidewell. It was a great rivalry weekend this past week. Alabama-Auburn went down to the final minute of that game. Michigan-Ohio State was down in the final drive. We're going to cover that. We're going to start out with some coaching being fired in the NFL, then a few coaching hires in college football. And this news this morning made my absolute day. The Carolina Panthers have fired head coach Frank Reich after a 1-10 start in his first season as the head coach. Reich becomes the first NFL head coach since the 1970 merger to be fired in back-to-back seasons after last year's dismissal from the Indianapolis Colts. After yesterday, when the Panthers had a 4th and 6, basically for the game, and he decided to throw a screen pass after knowing after 11 games that the offensive line, awful, the receivers, awful, but we're going to try to run a screen pass and got nothing. I think that was really the nail in the coffin for Panthers fans and obviously for the owner, David Tepper. Nathan, what are your thoughts on Tepper firing another coach into the season, mid-season now?
Well, I don't know why he hired him in the first place. I was automatically skeptical since Frank Reich was coming off of being fired with his time with the Colts, and then the Panthers went and hired him. And I was like, I know he had good work with QBs in the past, but I just did not agree with the hire. I thought it was kind of poor, especially with the situation the Panthers were going into, and he proved to not do good with his rookie quarterback, Bryce Young. Talk about the many problems going on with the Panthers at the moment. Talk about the offensive line being very, very poor. Not a lot of receiving options outside of maybe Adam Thielen. And then the defense has had a lot of injuries. So it's been a lot for Bryce Young to be thrown into. I don't think they've done him any favors. Honestly, I don't think if they had drafted C.J. Stroud that they would have done him any favors as well. Just because the team surrounding him would have been terrible. It starts with the GM and what he can do. First of all, this was the right move, firing Frank Reich. Just awful play calling. And at some point, you expected him to make a certain change throughout the season to point the Panthers in the right direction. They don't have their first round pick this year, so they couldn't afford to lose. Yet they're sitting at 1-10. And it's been awful. It's not been fun to watch. There's been a lot of struggling on both sides of the ball. But what it's going to come down to is, can they find a coach that can work well with its coordinators and really take away from himself having to control play calling duties or having to worry about different personnel on the field when he needs to actually be coaching the game. Because I think Frank Reich was way too hands-on. And with other stuff, he should have been more hands-on. So this was the right move. This was a long time coming, and I'm not really surprised it came before the NFL season was done because he just did a terrible job with the Panthers.
I think one thing to describe Panthers since Cam Newton decided to fumble the ball and watch it be recovered in the Super Bowl, it's just pain. That's the only word for it. David Tepper is arguably the worst owner in the NFL right now. I know Jim Irsay, he's a little bit of a different kind of person there, how weird he is and stuff like that. But talking about owner and managing a football team, there's somebody that beat David Tepper. You talk about him being basically the dictator of the organization. He makes all the decisions. I think he thinks he's Jerry Jones or something. You look at his record since he took over as the owner, 30-63. 5 head coaches in 4 years, including the interims with Steve Wilkes last year. He's fired back-to-back head coaches mid-season, Matt Rule last year, Frank Reich now. I mean, he obviously thinks he can do better than his current GM right now, and it's been proven that he can't. You go out, you get Bryce Young, who I think is a pretty good quarterback. I think he could be in the upper echelon of quarterbacks in the NFL. At this point, he's definitely not better than C.J. Stroud. I think he has the potential to be better than C.J. Stroud. But you look at what Stroud has in Houston. He has DeMeco Ryans, who is going to be a candidate for Coach of the Year, if not the Coach of the Year. the offensive coordinator there, Bobby Slowick, he worked under Mike McDaniel, Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco, so he has experience running that type of offense. The offensive line, while they were injured at the beginning part of the season, and while they've kind of struggled with protection here and there, they're not as bad as the Carolina Panthers. I don't think you can top the Carolina Panthers offensive line. Maybe the Commanders is the next closest, but Houston, Laramie Tunsil's on one end, Titus Howard's on the other. They got some good interior players there. Jarrett Patterson's been a stud for them, a rookie. He's been doing good at center. So I mean, and you look at the weapons CJ Stroud has. Tank Dell, he's been absolutely amazing. He's arguably the best receiver in this current draft class at this current moment in time, maybe outside of somebody like Zay Flowers. Nico Collins, he's burst onto the scene with a good quarterback now. John Mechie, he hasn't really seen a lot of playing time, but we know he could be good. Noah Brown, he had a few breakout games. I mean, CJ Stroud's got a plethora of weapons. He's good at quarterback as well. I know he gave him a lot of heat when he did a terrible job on that aptitude test or whatever that quarterbacks take, but he's done a great job there in Houston. Bryce Young, while he's made some pretty bad decisions, there's been numerous pick sixes. I believe he's thrown 3 or 4. I know he threw a 2-in-1 game to Kenny Moore, and then a couple weeks ago he threw one again. But it's not all on Bryce Young. Like you pointed out, Nathan, the offensive line for Carolina is abysmal. Taylor Moton at right tackle, and then Ikem Ekwonu at left tackle. I mean, you would think that the investment they have in both those guys, they'd be the bookends, and we'd have to be worrying about something else other than the offensive line. But Ekwonu and Moton have been atrocious. The interior of the offensive line is a rotating musical chairs at this point. Nobody can stay healthy, and the people that do stay healthy are atrocious. Calvin Throckmorton is an absolute clown. He's no longer on the team. Austin Corbett can't stay healthy. Bradley Bozeman is pretty meh. It's just awful. And it comes down to the management of this roster. You have to know you need protection for your quarterback. And if you don't have protection or adequate protection, you need to get him some weapons that can get open and not run around the field like they have run a 5-4. I mean, I'm pretty sure that Jordan Davis last night, when he was blitzing or trying to track down Josh Allen, had a faster recorded speed there than the Panthers receivers have had all season. I mean, Adam Thielen, I know he's had great years in Minnesota. He would be a wide receiver 3 on the majority of teams in this league. Jonathan Mingo, there was a catch yesterday where Bryce Young put it on the money, and he's flailing out of bounds like he's adjusting out of bounds for some reason. DJ Chark can't stay healthy. Terrace Marshall, I don't know where he's at. Vested a second-round pick in him. He's nowhere to be seen. Laviska Shenault, your guess is as good as mine. Bryce Young was put in an awful situation. Frank Reich, awful head coach. Been proven he's not good. I'm sorry, he's just not. I doubt he gets another opportunity within the next 5 years. He's just that bad of a head coach. David Tepper has got to right the ship here or give some duties over to the actual GM here, because if not, you're going to waste Bryce Young, and you're also going to waste basically 2 first-round picks, because your pick this year is going to be first overall. I'm sorry. It is. You basically traded number 9 last year in the first overall pick, which could have been Caleb Williams, Drake May, whoever you wanted, for Bryce Young. And like I said, I think Bryce Young could be a great quarterback in this league. But at this point, it's an overpay. You look like a bozo.
Yeah.
It's pain. It is so much pain being a Panthers fan. And if Gray was here right now, he would be having the same sentiment. I mean, this team is a dumpster fire, can't do anything correctly, can't hire a coach correctly, can't sign players correctly. I'm just waiting for the offseason for us to let Brian Burns walk for virtually nothing. We're just going to say, Brian Burns, go ahead. We won't trade you or anything. We'll just let you walk out the door for nothing, because we're just that big of a dumpster fire.
It's like they expected Bryce Young to come in and basically do everything for the whole offense without giving him anything to work with. He already did that out at Alabama, and you saw how successful that was. It's awful, the situation they put him in. He's made a lot of mistakes, but that's to be expected when it's his first season in the NFL, and he hasn't known what to expect. I mean, he's been thrown headfirst into the ocean basically, and he's having trouble swimming. And he needs someone who can help him do that. And that starts with hiring a good coach that can work well with him. But for this year, it's a wash, like you said, Alex. I don't know what you can do to improve this year. I don't even want to look at Carolina's schedule because I don't really think it matters who they play. Whenever the Texans was miraculous. I don't even know how that happened to this point. I'm surprised this team has a win. That it just sucks. And the biggest thing is the fact that y'all went and got Miles Sanders in free agency, and
don't even
and then don't even play the guy.
No, we play him. He just can't run the ball the right direction. And also the offensive line can't run block, so it's just a double-edged sword there.
We'll go in circles. Why don't we move on here?
Please, before I end up leaving and having to walk out of the room and take a deep breath. I'm almost at that point now. Moving on to the coaching hires in college football. Texas A&M has hired Duke's head football coach Mike Elko to the same position. Elko has previously served as A&M's defensive coordinator, from 2018 to 2021 under Jimbo Fisher. Nathan, when this opening happened, there was a lot of speculation that Elko is the number one guy. I personally thought, as I said on that show, that he would probably stay at Duke because he was the man there. They worshiped the floor he walked on. I mean, he couldn't do anything wrong. And in A&M, there's a lot of expectations and stuff like that. But what do you make of Elko going to A&M after the whole Mark Stoops fiasco they had earlier this weekend?
Yeah, it feels like we were thrown for a loop whenever I saw the news about Mark Stoops, and I was like, that's very confusing. It's definitely not a lateral move. If Mark Stoops had went to A&M, it would have been an improvement, but you're within the same conference, and it's very bad when you're leaving one SEC team to go to another, in my opinion. What it came down to for Mike Elko, I think, was going back to a place he's comfortable with. I'm not saying he's not comfortable with Duke, but you look at the time he spent under Jimbo Fisher from 2018 to 2021. I thought he ran a terrific defense. I know there were some faults in there, but he got to work with a lot of talent. And I thought he did good with the amount of talent he had. And during that time, really, the only problem was the offense. So I think Mike Elko going back to take over a team that is filled with talent, that is, A&M as a university has a lot of money that they can work with, show for a lot for NIL and for recruiting. I think Mike Elko is going to do a great job here. I like the job he did at Duke this season, especially with the amount of talent he had. And I think one thing for the Texas A&M Aggies they saw Mike Elko do was win with less talent. And that's one thing Jimbo Fisher had struggled with in the past, and obviously struggled with at A&M. He struggled with the highest level of talent. So bringing the guy like Mike Elko, who does more with less, was probably a bright sign for him. Going forward, he's going to his first year in the new SEC. You add on Texas and Oklahoma, you can't really expect him to go and win the whole West and win an SEC championship. But I do think it's going to end up going better than previous seasons had for the Aggies. And I think there more things than less. There will be a clear direction where the team is going rather than a bunch of different ways like it was under Jimbo Fisher.
I'm surprised that I'm sitting here saying that Texas A&M got their coaching hire right, because I think they ultimately
almost did. I mean, they almost didn't.
I think Mike Elko was the right guy there. That like we talked about with Mark Stoops being named the head coach kind of through the media, and then the backlash A&M fans had, and then it was kind of like, no, never mind, we're going to go with Mike Elko. And then you had Dabo Sweeney rumored there as well. I think Mike Elko was the right guy, but it's going to come down to who the offensive coordinator is there, because these past few years on the offensive side of the football have been abysmal. Mike Elko has been proven, like you said, Nathan, to be a good defensive coordinator, good defensive mind. He'll bring in the right guys for that side of the football, but you got to bring good offensive coordinator to coach up guys like Connor Weigman at quarterback, and then you're going to have weapons like Evan Stewart for him.
I put asterisks by that.
Yeah, it just depends on what the transfer portal is, but it just comes down to, like I said, the offensive coordinator, and we'll see who he hires. Hopefully, it's a vast improvement for someone like Jimbo Fisher, which I don't think is hard to do at this point. All right, the next coaching hire was done by Mississippi State. They hired Oklahoma offensive coordinator Jeff Lebby to be the university's next head football coach. Nathan, Jeff Lebby already has experience working in the state of Mississippi, being the offensive coordinator under a guy in Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. Do you think they made the right hire here with somebody like Jeff Lebby, or think they should have gone a different route with maybe Jamie Chadwell, who was the big rumor, and there was all these social media posts of him being actually in Starkville.
Yeah, honestly, you go back and forth between the two hires, and honestly, I don't think they made a wrong decision here. They went after a guy that could vastly improve their offense, which has struggled with Will Rogers at the helm this season. Ever since Mike Leach and his passing, I feel like the offense has just went downhill as a whole. So bringing back a guy who really knows how to air the ball out and really benefits maybe a guy like Will Rogers, maybe can convince him to stay instead of entering the transfer portal. I think will be big. Other than that, he knows how to work with talent. With his time at Oklahoma, you saw what he did under Brett Venables' first year, and I think really the difference between Jeff Lebby and Jimmy Chadwell is that it's more of a it's like putting on a glove. It's like putting on a fresh new glove. Jeff Lebby just fit the glove a little bit better than Jamie Chadwell might have. And that's my opinion because I think if Chadwell would have came in, I think he would have done a terrific job too. Honestly, he might have been a better coach to this point. But let's not forget that coaches will develop too. I mean, it's not like players are the only ones who develop. Coaches will develop throughout time and get more experience with being a head coach. I think Jeff Lebby getting that opportunity at Mississippi State is going to be good for him, and it's going to work out for the Bulldogs as well.
Yeah, I think the big problem for Mississippi State this season, like you said, Nathan, was that offense. I mean, it was hard to watch all season, and that's surprising considering the staff that kind of rolled over from after Mike Leach passed away with Zach Arnett, and I don't know what happened. The defense was pretty good, but I think bringing in a guy like Jeff Lebby, who has the experience working under guys like Lane Kiffin and Josh Heupel, and has really done wonders for that Oklahoma offense with Dylan Gabriel at quarterback. I think he can come in and turn this whole program around. I mean, fans obviously think so. They were carrying the athletic director on their shoulders when he got off the plane after they hired Jeff Lebby. So obviously they think it's the right hire. Time will tell if it is. This is probably the hardest job in the SEC right now because you think you got to compete with Ole Miss, but you also got to compete recruiting wise with Ole Miss as well, but also Auburn, Alabama, Georgia. I mean, you're basically the bottom of the barrel when it comes to recruits wanting to come to your school. But I think Jeff Lebby will be that guy that can do more with less, kind of like Mike Elko did at Duke. Hopefully he can. I think he has the ability to. So I think they nailed it here. And then the last hire, Michigan State hired Oregon State's head football coach Jonathan Smith to the same position. Nathan, I ask once again, did Michigan State make the right hire here with Jonathan Smith?
It was perfect. It was really under the radar too, and I know Jonathan Smith, with the job he had done at Oregon State this season, was bound to get a better coaching job somewhere else. Just with Oregon State not being really in a conference that year, I mean, I guess you can define the fact too. But what he's done with Oregon State this year has been nothing short of incredible with the amount of talent on the roster, with his quarterback. They competed against some of the best teams in the country. And he really just built up his resume to say, hey, look at me, I can coach at big name schools and against big name schools. So look at Michigan State and where they were. This is obviously after Mel Tucker and his whole situation fiasco. I think what it comes down to is Jonathan Smith going to be able to compete with Michigan, with Ohio State, and really take back Michigan to where they can compete within the Big Ten, not to mention the numerous teams joining the conference as well. I think he's terrific at developing talent, especially on the offensive side of the ball, and that's something Michigan State has not had this season, especially after watching their latest performance versus Penn State, not scoring any points. So this was a terrific hire. Honestly, it might have been the best hire out of all three that we went over, in my opinion. I think Jonathan Smith is a very underrated head coach, and he really proved it at his time at Oregon State. So it's going to be interesting to see what he does at Michigan State.
Yeah, like you said, Nathan, I think they nailed this hire because if they hadn't hired Jonathan Smith, I think they probably would have had to settle for more of a outside of probably a group of five head coach. But they got a Power 5 head coach here with Jonathan Smith, He's a proven winner in the Power 5 at Oregon State. They didn't win the conference championship or anything like that, but you look what Oregon State was before he got there and what they were after he left there. I mean, that program's completely turned around. And you look at Michigan State now and the dumpster fire that it is after Mel Tucker and all that business. I think you bring in a guy like Jonathan Smith and he can turn your program around. But you brought up Nathan, him having to compete with teams like Michigan and Ohio State, not only on the field, but off the field when it comes to recruiting. And Smith has not coached outside of the Northwest before. So it's going to be interesting to see how he's able to navigate these recruits and who he's able to bring in, if he's going to be able to bring in these top level recruits or these 3 and 4 stars, stuff like that. It's not proven that he can yet, but we will see if he can. And it's benefiting him that now you can have teams like Washington, Oregon, USC, and UCLA coming in, expanding the reach of this Big Ten conference to that Northwest where he's familiar with. So that'll give comfortability there. And I think they nailed it here. I don't think it was the best hire out of the entire cycle so far. I think Mike Elko was, just because of the need that you had for a head coach.
I'm not going to put that type of pressure on Mike Elko, though.
I'm
not an Aggie fan here. I can't do that.
I know, but the way they could have gone so wrong with that hire, and how they did so right with hiring Mike Elko. I mean, I got to give Texas A&M, like I said, credit for making the right decision there, because they could have gone so wrong hiring somebody like Mark Stoops, who I think does good things at Kentucky, but I don't think he would have lasted at A&M. And I really don't think hiring Dabo Swinney would have been any different than having Jimbo Fisher there. I'm sorry, I know Dabo has a national championship and stuff like that, but
I'm surprised Dabo was even in the conversation after Jimbo Fisher.
His inability to navigate the transfer portal and willingness to use NIL money and stuff like that, I just don't think that would have even worked out. They'd have been Jimbo Fisher 2.0, and they already had to deal with that before. All right, Nathan, I know you've been sitting here for a minute.
Go ahead and lock in, everyone. Go ahead.
Put your seatbelts on.
Let's just go and get into it.
Number 8 Alabama travels to Jordan-Hare to take on Auburn in the Iron Bowl, probably the best Iron Bowl I've ever witnessed. And I was in the stands for the 2021 Iron Bowl with that 4 overtime thriller. This one, I think, tops it. We were there, Nathan, with our friends and all that.
Yet again for another one.
The final score, 27-24. Jalen Milroe. There's been so many names for this pass on 4th and 31. Milroe Magic, the Gravedigger, the Catch Heard Around the World, Disaster in the Pasture Part 2, Nightmare in Jordan-Hare. I mean, there's numerous names you can give this thing. Nathan, what would be your name for this if you were to put it on a plaque somewhere for the go-ahead touchdown? What would you give it?
Well, Isaiah Bond made the catch, and he dubbed it the Gravedigger, so I think I'm going to go ahead and stick with that. Most menacing, and really tells a story of what happened. Just sitting here, still just on my mind how impossible of a situation that was. I mean, I want to talk about the rest of the game, but I think we need to go ahead and spend some time talking about go ahead and break down this play of what happened. If anyone's unaware and you weren't glued to your TV screen or at the game, which would be really surprising because I'm pretty sure everyone was in the United States as a whole. Jalen Milroe, Alabama, looking very glim. 4th and goal from the 31. In an unlikely scenario against prevent defense, Auburn decides to rush 2 with a QB spy. And Jalen Milroe sits in the pocket for what seemed years at that point. And finally, it's the ball go. Isaiah Bond against DJ James in the corner in the end zone comes down with it. The catch would have been good in the NFL.
2 feet.
Just no words for the amount of competitiveness, adversity that Jalen Milroe has shown throughout the season. But you get to this point, and people really question, can Jalen Milroe be the guy? Is Jalen Milroe him? Answer is he's him. This was a Bryce Young throw. This was better than what Bryce Young did in 2021. And that was
more
hard.
difficult.
But Jalen Milroe did this against prevent defense. And I think we were talking about this before the show. I brought the question. What was more impossible, the kick six or completing a 4th and 31 to basically win the game? Personally, I think it might be easier to score on a kick six. There has to be a lot to fall into place on both plays. But you think about kick six, what things went wrong, and there's a lot more possibility for things to go wrong like that than when there's 8 people back in prevent defense.
Yeah. Here's my thing, Nathan. If you're talking about the same circumstances here, the kick six, we had the jumbo package on the field. So you had a bunch of big boys running after Chris Davis. And with the 4th and 31, you had prevent defense. Jalen Miller was thrown against quadruple coverage. I know DJ James and Isaiah Bonner one-on-one, but I mean, you think that's got to be much more difficult than trying to run that back against the big boys.
Not to mention it's 31 yards away. I mean, and Auburn's defense knew it was coming. Everyone in the stadium knew it was coming, yet they failed to stop it. They failed to execute. And that's one thing, Alabama in this game, they executed when it mattered. People will say that this was luck, and I will continue to say this was fortune. You can be fortunate in a game. You can be fortunate with the circumstances that you are given. But what it comes down to, can your players execute? Isaiah Bond, Jalen Miller, they both executed in this play. Auburn's DB, DJ James, he had the opportunity to execute and he failed to. And the game as a whole was very, very competitive. Nothing short of a miracle that Alabama was even in the situation to even be able to score the go-ahead touchdown. And I think we'll talk about that here in a second. But just to give Jalen Miller and Isaiah Bond their credit, it was basically a miracle. I had never had to sum up anything like this before. I thought when we were at the game in 2021 that was going to be the best thing I'd ever seen. Well, let's just say we got our money's worth out of the tickets we spent.
Yes,
just no words. Alex, go ahead and break down the rest of the game so we can go ahead and talk about this and we can move on because there are more important things at hand.
Yeah, so let's just start off with the reffing in this game. I think that's the story of the entirety of it because this game could have gone entirely different ways. It could have been Auburn could have won, Alabama could have blown them out. I mean, the refereeing was atrocious.
Officiating in this game for both sides was just terrible.
It wasn't one-sided. I think it was pretty evened out on how bad it was. This is the same crew that did the Tennessee-Alabama game last year. I mean, this is start off with the first play of the game, right, Nathan? The face mask that was absolutely missed. I mean, it was similarly to the Jalen Waddle
possession, but
yeah, I mean,
early on in the game.
Yeah, I mean, it was similar to the Jalen Waddle one where his face mask is basically to the side of his head. I mean, his whole face is doing 180 almost, and they miss it. That's inexcusable. If it was
that
like
goes against player safety right there.
I mean, if it was more like it was more like towards the collar area, and you kind of couldn't see if it was face mask or collar.
It was right in front of him.
I would understand, but when the player's face whole helmet turns, there's obviously an issue there. This whole crew needs to be dispersed, fired, let go, or something. That was not the only inexcusable call they had this game. There was holding calls called and then absolutely missed. Both sides of the football, both teams.
Pass interferences.
Pass interference. I mean, Isaiah Bond had a catch in the end zone that was he was hitting the back of the pushing the back, wasn't called. Auburn, there was a few things for them as well.
3 men in motion when the ball was snapped. And it was a offsides. It wasn't offsides, but it should have been a offsetting penalty when they snapped the ball.
Yes.
Don't know how you don't get that right. You can go down to Alabama's possession after that. When Jermaine Burton had caught the ball inbounds.
My Lord.
They had originally called a catch. Referee comes down the sideline and turns it into an incomplete pass. They go and look at it for a solid 10 years. And the head referee, after everyone in the stadium got their look at it and pretty much concluded that it was a catch and that it was going to be a first down, said that the call on the field stand. That was probably one of the worst missed calls, I think, from the game. But you can continue going down the list. There was unsportsmanlike conduct, a lot of stuff happening after the play.
I mean, Alabama player got suplexed.
And they had originally thrown the flag for it. They waved it off. Don't know why that even happened. And then you can go down to after Alabama had scored on the kickoff where there was a fight. 0 flags were thrown. So I don't know. there was a referee run over, and there were no flags thrown for that. Just this whole crew really got on my nerves, and I'm sure it got on a lot of Auburn fans' nerves as well, because they were just really inept at doing their jobs, and it just did not feel like a good, clean game for everyone. Just a lot of missed calls, and it attributed it to just the same crew working together. So they don't need to work together anymore. But outside of that, looking what the Alabama offense did, I mean, first drive, Alex, when they had the ball, they looked like a train. They were moving. They looked like they had a good game plan. They made it right down the field and scored. But after that,
they had the excessive blocking penalty during that drive, but they
the JC Latham excessive blocking out of bounds. But that's mistake number one. I'll keep track of that. They kick it to Auburn. Auburn goes. I think they might have gotten the first down. If not, they went 3 and out. Alabama gets the ball back. And then there was a touchdown, but called back for holding. It was holding. It was holding. That was a good call. CJ Dupree was definitely outside on the block there. Auburn gets the ball back, and they respond. That's the biggest thing was if Bama wanted to take control of the game, they needed to do it early, and they need to set the tone. Making mistakes early is what put them in this scenario. Auburn responds. The Alabama gave a big chunk play. It might have been to Darqueze Hunter, I believe.
Yes, it was a run. Yeah, by Darqueze.
I forget how long it was, but it put him in prime scoring position. I think it honestly was down to the red zone. But Auburn takes advantage of that. They get on the board, tie the game at 7-7. And really, I think that was to the point where I started like getting nervous, because once you give Auburn life, it is the worst thing. You got to keep your foot on the pedal, and you got to continue to score, and you got to continue to play good defense. The defensive line in this game was really
awful.
It was awful the way they played, and it's not like they were on the field constantly, because Alabama's offense was moving the ball a good amount at the time, so they had time to rest. It's just what it came down to. You got to give credit to Hugh Freeze and the play calling he made. RPOs for Peyton Thorne, getting him into favorable scenarios. The offensive line for Auburn played the best game I've ever seen them play. They played together. They just were more physical. They were the better line in this game. And it really makes you question where Alabama defensive line was mentally. You can break down the edge rushers. I mean, Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell, they both had insane games. But once Auburn was able to get past that first level into the second level, it's who can make the best open field tackle. You're giving up these chunk plays of 4 to 6 to 8 yards, and you really can't expect to get stops off that. It's got to be better. I mean, there's nothing more I can say about it. The defensive line just has to be better. You're going into probably the toughest challenge all season long. You're going to face the best offensive line you've seen up until this point. Maybe Texas's was right there too. But in my opinion, Georgia's is right there. It's probably the best. Running game for Georgia's not a slouch either. They don't know how to run the ball. But I really think what it comes down to is how much they were thrown off by Peyton Thorne being able to be that dual threat.
I don't know why he's done it all season.
Yeah.
I'm so confused. Like we'd have a spy on him, and we did the spy over pursue the quarterback. I just didn't understand that whatsoever. There was no adjustment made at halftime, and Alabama's been the king of doing that all season, making the halftime adjustment since the Texas game, and they just didn't this game. And I don't know where that was from Kevin Steele and T-Rob. It just it's confusing.
A lot of communication errors on the backside of the defense. Malachi Moore between him and Kool-Aid, and they left a guy wide open. Gave up that's another chunk play they gave up for the touchdown. It really seemed like they were picking on the left side because there was a lack of communication over there. Other than that, I felt like those two played a very good game. But you got to communicate better. You can't be letting up chunk plays like this. This is what got you in the hole. Auburn was doing one thing on the offensive end. That's just running the ball. They were doing what they knew how to do best, and they stuck to that one thing they were good at and continued to do it over and over and over again. They did it. This was basically the same game plan they had for Georgia. You look at what they did against Georgia. I believe they had like 200 rushing yards on the ground and 2 touchdowns. So very similar to how they performed versus Georgia. Peyton Thorne in this game really played hard. I know his outline 5-16, 91 yards, a touchdown, 2 interceptions. He had 15 carries for 57 yards, and those were the big difference. The carries he had on the ground kept Alabama's defense back on their heels because they didn't know what to expect next. Those 2 interceptions, he had one at the end of the half and then one at the end of the game. I don't really think you need to attribute Peyton Thorne to turn the ball over because he really didn't in this game. The only turnover is Coy Moore's muff punt.
Hands?
Yeah. Breaking down that, who was it? Keontae Scott
He's
was
normal.
back
He's a normal guy.
Yeah. And I don't know who Auburn's special team coach is, but he might lose his job over this because putting that was his personality. He decided to put in. He decided to put in Coy Moore. I guess for good hands, maybe awful hands, I guess, because he ended up muffing the punt. I don't understand as a head coach how you don't know what personnel you have out there. It goes down to communication. You got to communicate. Auburn was right there in the game. They should have won the game. They flat out should have won the game. They were the better team. They played with more tenacity. They wanted it more, and they made mistakes when they shouldn't have made mistakes. Alabama, Jalen Laurel did not turn the ball over at all, and that's the main difference maker. In rivalry games like this, when games come down to a wire, teams who turn the ball over are likely to lose the game. And Coy Moore muffing the punt with 4:48 left in the game was the difference maker. Gave Alabama a prime field position. Alabama almost messed that up somehow. But for Auburn, you got to look on the bright side. I know it's very, very hard. You had a 99.9% chance of winning before the 4th and 31. It's hard to look at. It's basically like Alabama fans who had 3 minutes to kick six. That's what they feel. It's hard, but you look at where your team's at right now, and what Hugh Freeze has done in his first year. I know the record doesn't really tell the story of how it's gone. You have done a lot more with a lot less, and the amount of talent coming in for Auburn, it's a lot. They're going to be able to compete against the same teams, and they'll probably win games where they shouldn't have, or they should have this year. So there's bright things coming for Auburn. Their future's bright, but this game, for Auburn fans, it's like a stake to the heart. For Bama fans, it's like going on the most steep roller coaster ever, because you go and you think you're at the very, very bottom, and suddenly you rise and rise and rise and immediately drop back down. It's crazy. Anxiety levels through the roof in this game. Me and you, Alex, I mean, we were pretty much ready to accept the fact that they were going to rush the field. I mean, that 4th and goal is basically preparing to watch them rush the field, and that went out the window.
Silence.
Yeah.
We
were the only section that was cheering. The rest of the team was completely silent, and for good reason. I mean, if I was an Auburn fan, I would be in complete disarray. I wouldn't know how to react either. Alex, Will Reichert, he has tied the NCAA career points record.
He'll break it next week.
He just needs one extra point.
He could have broken it if he made that field goal earlier in the game, but
it got blocked.
Yeah, I know. But
it's not his fault. But terrific game from everyone. Last edition of the CBS Iron Bowl, I think Brad and Gary had their hands full. At least we had to listen to it. One more game with Brad and Gary, actually. SEC championship, which is coming up this weekend. Georgia opens as a 5-point favorite. People will run their mouth on Twitter this weekend, wanting to base off what Alabama's done, or really what Georgia has done too, because Georgia didn't have a great game either this past weekend. But really, what's going to come down to is who can execute better, who can be the mistake-free team. So there's some opportunity ahead for both of these teams.
All right, moving on to some other games. UAB took on North Texas and ended up losing 45-42 on a walk-off field goal by North Texas. depressing year for UAB here, ending 4-8. I mean, it's just rough. But his first season under Trent Dilfer, hopefully he turns it around next season. Jacksonville State ended up losing to New Mexico State 20-17. So New Mexico State is 2-0 against teams in the state of Alabama. But Jacksonville State, luckily, along with James Madison, due to some losses around the country, both those teams are now going to be bowl eligible and will be going bowling. So I'm happy to see both those teams get the chance to go to these bowl games after having such great seasons. All right, Nathan, let's just quickly go over the game. Number 2, Ohio State taking on number 3, Michigan. Michigan ends up winning 30-24, and Ryan Day has now lost 3 in a row to Michigan. And the last time this happened was 1995 to 1997. And the reason behind Ohio State losing this game, they had a chance at the end, but Kyle McCord threw an interception to Rod Moore as they were in Michigan territory with 25 seconds left. So Kyle McCord ends up costing Ohio State the game. I don't want to say it's all on his shoulders, but he threw the crucial interception. He also threw an interception earlier in the game to Will Johnson. And we kind of touched on that during the Alabama game, Nathan, with turnovers and mental errors costing teams these games in rivalry weekend. And then it's going to be definitely important in championship weekend. And it costed Ohio State here. Should Ohio State be looking to get rid of Ryan Day? I mean,
no.
He was on the hot seat. He was on the hot seat last year. And he's lost 3 in a row now, and there's little to no chance of Ohio State making the college football playoff unless there's a disaster scenario. I mean, what does Ohio State do from here? And then Michigan, Jim Harbaugh is back next week. Will this team run the table? We protected them to earlier this year when the season was starting, but they've kind of been bumpy with Jim Harbaugh on the sideline. Well, do you think they continue to ride the wave here and do good in the college football playoff, unlike last year?
Well, start off with the Ryan Day being fired scenario. That's no, you don't need to be considering that as a fan of Ohio State. Look what Ryan Day has done outside of the game. I mean, he would have had an undefeated season if it wasn't for the fact that he had to play this game at the very end. You had a red win against Notre Dame. You had a home win against Penn State, and really you took care of business everywhere else he had to. Ryan Day in the past, he's gotten you to the college football playoff. He's gotten you to a national championship. I know he just hasn't executed to this point, but it's the age-old question of not if he can execute, it's really when he can execute. It's not like Ryan Day gets to suit up and play quarterback for his team. He's got to coach up his players and put them in the prime scenario to execute. And I think the personnel he had out there was the best he could have had. And what it came down to was Kyle McCord made a few two mistakes for Ohio State to win this game. Michigan took advantage of the situations, and they were able to get ahead. It was a battle. I mean, both these teams are very, very good teams. They have talent across the board. But what it comes down to, Michigan was able to run the ball better. I forget. I saw some stat where the winner of this game, I think, is 22-0 when they were the leading rushers. Blake Corum is a dog. He really just sets the tone for this Michigan team. He is the guy. If you want to stop Michigan, if you want to beat Michigan, you have to stop Blake Corum. And no team has been able to do that yet. That's just how good of a running back he is. He runs with a lot of anger, and he does not give up. But Ohio State, I really thought that they were capable of winning this game. And I think if a few plays go differently, we're looking at a different scenario. But Michigan, they took care of business without their head coach. Jim Harbaugh missing from the sideline. He will be returning for next week's game against Iowa, Big Ten championship. Definitely, it's a little easier given that Iowa does not know how to score over 20 points a game. I would pick Michigan to run the table if it hasn't been for the fact that they had struggled against lesser teams. I've seen a lot of weaknesses on both sides of the ball for Michigan. I know they won this game, but they're going to have to start facing some really, really big competition. I think they beat Iowa. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I think they're going to go to the college football playoff. But who will they see in the college football playoff? It's going to be very difficult to say right now. Championship weekend, full of unexpected things to happen. But any team they do face is going to be very, very good. They're going to be very deserving. There's not going to be any undeserving teams, with the exception of maybe Florida State. but we'll have to see. Credit to Michigan, man. Without their head coach, that is something else.
Yeah, I mean, without their head coach and their interim head coach, I guess, or their standing head coach, Sharon Moore, was the head coach, offensive coordinator, as well as the offensive line coach. He was running triple duty and still managed to beat Ryan Day. So kudos to him. Kudos to this team for doing that. Ryan Day, man, every year comes up short. Even outside of this game, look at last year, kicker can't make a field goal and you lose. I mean, he's so close every year, it just can't get over the hump. Maybe he can next year. We will see. I don't know what to make of Ryan Day right now. Hopefully he can figure it out. Two upsets here. Kentucky does beat number 10 Louisville 38-31, and Kentucky has now won 5 straight Governor's Cup. So good job for Mark Stoops and the Kentucky Wildcats. Then Iowa State beat number 19 Kansas State 42-35, and what was a very snowy game, and a lot of big plays from Iowa State really ended up getting them that win. Their shortest touchdown was 33 yards out. So, I mean, they really had some explosive plays there to win that game. Some other storylines. Number 4, Washington snuck past Washington State. After kicker Grady Gross nailed a 42-yard field goal as time expired. Michael Penix Jr., a quarterback, was less than impressive. Went 18-33, 204 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception in the win. He has really not been playing well lately, and I'd argue that Rome Odunze has been more valuable to this team than Michael Penix has been in the last couple of weeks. Nathan, would you have to agree with that?
I don't want to say it right now because there's still a very important game left, and I think I'll probably make my verdict after this game. But both of these guys are dogs. I think Michael Penix has just had some bad scenarios he's had to play in. But Rome Odunze is a dog, man.
Number 12, Ole Miss won the Egg Bowl behind running back Quinshon Judkins, 119 rushing yards, and an awesome defensive performance from head defensive coordinator Pete Golding.
Wow,
Jackson Dart, quarterback
something
for the Rebels, was pretty awful. 14-26, 96 yards and a touchdown. He did have 30 yards rushing, but I mean, that dude was awful the entire game. Got really carried by the Judkins in that defense. Mississippi State quarterback Will Rogers was pretty good. 25-39, 207 yards. Found the end zone rushing, but did not find the end zone passing. So this might have been his last game in Starkville. You mentioned earlier in the video when we were talking about Jeff Levy being hired that Will Rogers into the transfer portal. He has. I don't know where he would go. He's probably going to be the top transfer quarterback in the portal this offseason. So we will see and cover that when he announces where he's going or if he's staying. Number 1, Georgia held off Georgia Tech to win 31-23 for 23, right? Yeah. For an SEC record, 29th straight win. Bulldogs running back Kendall Milton, 18 carries, 156 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So Georgia was able to run the ball well against Georgia Tech, but this was much closer than it needed to be, especially against Georgia Tech, regardless of how they've been playing this season. But so is the Alabama-Auburn game, so anything can happen.
throw it out the window.
Yep, rivalry weekend, anything can happen, and it did this weekend. And then the last thing, behind Trey Benson's 3 rushing touchdowns, Florida State finished off Florida 24-15 to keep their college playoff hopes alive. And Seminoles backup quarterback for that matter, Tate Rodemacher, 12-25, 134 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. He wasn't great, but when Trey Benson's playing his best game of his season so far, you don't really need your quarterback to do a lot. But when you go play Louisville this weekend, you're going to have to get Rodemacher to do something. I mean, he's got to be much more effective. And if they even win that game, it's not make the college 12 playoff. He's going to be much more effective if they play somebody like a Georgia or Michigan, because those defenses are really good and they're going to force you to throw the football. They're not going to let Trey Benson run all over them like Florida's awful defense. All right, that's all time we have for today. Thank you for listening to Students of the Game.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.